Broke mechanic kneels to fix her shoe unaware. She's the CEO of the company that just fired him. The fluorescent lights of Henderson Automotive's main office hummed, a cold, indifferent sound that seemed to mock Liam Caldwell's rapidly fraying composure. He clutched the crisp termination letter, its stark black print a brutal contrast to the grease stubbornly ingrained under his fingernails, remnants of a loyal decade spent coaxing life back into stubborn engines. Mr. Henderson, the regional manager, a man whose tailored suit seemed to absorb all warmth from the room, adjusted his tie. Restructuring, Caldwell. A necessary evil. Market dynamics, you understand. Liam understood nothing except the sudden, sickening lurch in his stomach. Market dynamics wouldn't pay the rent, wouldn't put food on the table for Maya, his 6-year-old daughter whose cough had been worsening. He thought of her small, trusting face, the way her eyes lit up when he read her bedtime stories, his voice always a little hoarse from shouting over engine noise all day. But, my performance reviews, Liam stammered, his voice barely a whisper. They've always been excellent. Top mechanic 3 years running. Henderson offered a dismissive wave, his eyes already drifting towards the sleek laptop on his polished desk. Efficiency protocols. The system flagged certain redundancies. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. The words echoed in the sterile air, a hollow pronouncement that felt intensely, devastatingly personal. Liam's mind raced, a frantic slideshow of overdue bills, the thinning soles of Maya's shoes, the worried lines etched around his wife Sarah's eyes. He'd poured his heart and soul into this job, often staying late, skipping lunches, all to ensure every vehicle left his bay purring like a contented cat. He remembered old Mrs. Gable, whose ancient sedan he'd kept running for years, refusing more than a token payment because he knew she was on a fixed income. He'd even fixed Henderson's own luxury car off the books once, a complex electrical issue no one else could diagnose. And for what? To be a redundancy? A line item on a spreadsheet? He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, heavier than any engine block he'd ever lifted. The vibrant hum of the workshop, the familiar smell of oil and metal, the camaraderie with the other mechanics, all snatched away in a single impersonal conversation. He nodded, a numb, mechanical gesture, unable to summon the words to fight, to plead. The fight had been drained out of him, replaced by a chilling premonition of the hardship to come. He was just another cog, easily discarded. His worn toolkit, a symbol of his skill and dedication, now felt like a lead weight in his hand as he walked away from the only secure employment he'd known for a decade. The manager's insincere best of luck, a final, bitter twist of the knife. The city outside seemed to press in on him, its cacophony a stark contrast to the sudden, terrifying silence in his future. The city air, thick with exhaust fumes and the distant wail of sirens, felt heavy in Liam's lungs as he walked, aimlessly at first, then with the reluctant trudge towards home. Each step was a burden, the pavement beneath his worn boots a hard, unforgiving reality. The termination letter, folded and refolded in his pocket, felt like a block of ice against his thigh. He thought of Sarah, her unwavering support a beacon in his often challenging life. How could he tell her? How could he add this crushing weight to her already burdened shoulders? She worked part-time at a bakery, her small income barely enough to cover groceries. His salary had been their lifeline, the foundation upon which their modest dreams were built, a slightly larger apartment, maybe a small savings account for Maya's future. Now, that foundation had crumbled. The city, usually a place of bustling energy, now seemed to reflect his own despair. Towering buildings loomed like indifferent giants, their windows glinting like cold, watchful eyes. He passed shop displays filled with luxuries he could never afford, a bitter reminder of the chasm between his world and that of the truly secure. Inside his head, a cruel tally began. Rent due next week, the electricity bill, Maya's upcoming doctor's appointment for her persistent cough. His meager savings, painstakingly accumulated, would evaporate like mist in the morning sun. A wave of nausea washed over him. He felt adrift, a small boat cast into a stormy sea without an oar. Meanwhile, across town, Eleanor Vance, CEO of Vance Automotive Group, the parent company of Henderson Automotive, sat in the plush leather back seat of her chauffeured sedan. Her silver hair was impeccably styled, her tailored suit the epitome of understated power. She just concluded a tense video conference, greenlighting a series of cost-cutting measures across several subsidiaries, Henderson Automotive among them. The term personnel optimization had been used frequently. She hadn't delved into the minutiae of who these optimized personnel were. That was for regional managers like Henderson to handle. Her focus was on the bottom line, shareholder value, the relentless pursuit of growth. Yet, a sliver of disquiet pricked at her. The numbers were good, but a vague sense of emptiness often shadowed her achievements. Her driver pulled up to a chic boutique where she had a brief appointment. As Eleanor stepped onto the curb, the heel of her expensive Italian leather shoe caught on a grate. There was a sickening crack. The delicate heel snapped clean off. "Damn it," she muttered, more irritated by the inconvenience than the cost. She was already running late. It was a minor disruption in her perfectly orchestrated day, yet it felt oddly symbolic, a tiny imperfection in an otherwise flawless facade. She looked down at the broken shoe, a frown creasing her usually smooth brow. Liam, lost in the fog of his own bleak thoughts, was shuffling past a row of upscale shops when he noticed her. A woman, elegantly dressed, stood awkwardly by a gleaming black car, staring down at her foot with an expression of clear annoyance. One of her high-heeled shoes was visibly damaged, the heel dangling precariously. He saw the subtle flush on her cheeks, the way she tried to discreetly balance on one foot. For a moment, his own problems were so overwhelming that he almost walked on by. What did he care about a rich woman's broken shoe when his entire life felt broken? But then, a deeper instinct, one honed by years of fixing things, of seeing a problem and wanting to make it right, stirred within him. It was the same instinct that had him crawling under cars in freezing weather or spending an extra hour to ensure a repair was perfect. He saw not a wealthy woman, but someone in a small, fixable predicament. His own despair was a heavy cloak, yet a tiny spark of his inherent nature flickered through. He hesitated for only a second. What did he have to lose? He approached her cautiously. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Looks like you've got a bit of trouble there with your shoe." Eleanor Vance looked up, startled. A man in slightly grimy work clothes, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond physical tiredness, was addressing her. Her initial reaction was one of guarded surprise, a city dweller's innate caution around strangers. She clutched her purse a little tighter. "Yes, the heel. It just snapped," she said, her tone cool, polite but distant. Liam nodded. His eyes, though shadowed with his own worries, were kind. "I'm pretty good with my hands," he offered, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "I'm a mechanic, or I was." The words slipped out before he could stop them, a raw admission of his new reality. He gestured towards the shoe. "If you'll allow me, I might be able to do a temporary fix. At least enough to get you where you're going without a fall." Eleanor looked from his calloused, grease-stained hands to his earnest face. There was no guile there, only a genuine offer of assistance. It was unexpected. In her world, help usually came with an invoice or an expectation. "You think you can?" she asked, a touch of skepticism in her voice, though a larger part of her was intrigued, and, admittedly, a little desperate not to hobble into her next meeting. Liam knelt, without a moment's hesitation, on the gritty pavement. The act was unassuming, natural. He gently took the damaged shoe she offered, his touch surprisingly delicate for hands accustomed to wrestling with stubborn bolts and heavy machinery. "Let's see," he murmured, examining the break. "Ah, yes, clean snap. I might have just the thing." He reached into the pocket of his worn jacket and pulled out a small, multi-tool, something he always carried, a habit ingrained from years on the job. It was old, a bit battered, but reliable, much like himself. Liam worked with quiet concentration, his brow furrowed. The world around them, the honking taxis, the chatter of pedestrians, the rumble of the city, seemed to fade as he focused on the small, precise task. He carefully maneuvered a tiny screw from his multi-tool, using its plier attachment to gently ease the broken components of the heel back into an approximation of their original position. It wouldn't be a permanent fix, not like a cobbler could do, but he was aiming for stability, for function. Eleanor watched him, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. There was the initial surprise, then a grudging respect for his capable hands, but more than that, she was struck by his demeanor. He knelt there on the dirty sidewalk, his clothes bearing the marks of honest labor, fixing her $1,000 shoe with the same diligence he'd likely apply to a faulty carburetor. There was a quiet dignity about him, a groundedness that felt alien in her fast-paced, high-stakes world. He wasn't looking for praise, wasn't trying to impress. He was simply helping. After a few minutes, he looked up, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "There," he said, carefully handing the shoe back to her. "It should hold for a while. Just be a little careful with it." Eleanor slipped the shoe on. It felt surprisingly sturdy. She took a tentative step, solid. "That's actually quite remarkable," she admitted, a genuine note of surprise in her voice. "Thank you. You're very resourceful." She reached into her purse, pulling out her wallet. "Please, let me give you something for your trouble." Liam straightened up, shaking his head gently. A flicker of his earlier sadness crossed his face, but was quickly replaced by a quiet resolve. "No, ma'am, no need for that. Just glad I could help." He paused, then added softly, almost to himself, "Someone helped me once, when I was really down on my luck. Just paying it forward, I guess." His words, simple and unadorned, landed with an unexpected weight, paying it forward. It was a concept so foreign to the transactional nature of her business dealings, where every favor had a price, every action, a calculated return on investment. This man, who looked like he could use every penny, was refusing payment for a genuine act of service. Eleanor felt a strange pang, something akin to shame, or perhaps a dawning awareness of a different kind of currency. "Well, thank you, mister," she trailed off. "Liam," he supplied. Liam Caldwell. He offered a small, almost shy smile. "You have a good day, ma'am." And with that, he turned and began to walk away, melting back into the city crowd, leaving Eleanor standing there, her repaired shoe a tangible reminder of an encounter that had unexpectedly touched something deep within her. She watched him go, his shoulders slightly slumped, yet carrying an indefinable strength. Eleanor continued with her day, the broken then mended shoe a curious focal point in her thoughts. The meeting at the boutique was a blur of fabrics and designs. Later, in a sterile boardroom, surrounded by executives discussing profit margins and market penetration, Liam Caldwell's face kept intruding. His tired eyes, his calloused hands, his quiet refusal of her money. Just paying it forward. The phrase echoed, a counterpoint to the jargon, filled pronouncements about synergies and leveraging assets. She found herself glancing down at her shoe. The repair was neat, surprisingly effective. It wasn't just the skill, it was the spirit behind it. Here was a man, clearly down on his luck. She'd noted the weariness in him, the faint scent of oil and hardship, yet he possessed a generosity of spirit that seemed in short supply in her own rarefied atmosphere. The personnel optimization figures from Henderson Automotive, which she'd approved with detached efficiency only hours before, now felt different. They weren't just numbers, they were individuals, people like Liam, with skills, with dignity, with families to support. The dramatic irony was a silent, heavy presence in her mind. The man who had shown her such unprompted kindness was, unbeknownst to either of them at that moment, a casualty of her company's latest cost-cutting drive. A cold knot began to form in her stomach. How many Liams were there, swept aside by corporate edicts passed down from on high? She, Eleanor Vance, the architect of so much of this efficiency, prided herself on being informed, on having her finger on the pulse of her vast organization. But this brief, accidental encounter on a city sidewalk had revealed a startling blind spot. She saw balance sheets, profit and loss statements, strategic roadmaps. She hadn't truly seen the human cost. Liam's simple act of kneeling to fix a stranger's shoe had, in its quiet humility, held up a mirror to her own life, her own values, and she wasn't entirely comfortable with the reflection. The warmth of his gesture contrasted sharply with the often cold, calculating nature of her world. That evening, alone in her penthouse apartment, the city lights glittering like distant, unfeeling stars, Eleanor couldn't shake the image of Liam Caldwell. His name, his quiet strength, the integrity in his refusal. It was a small crack in the armor of her carefully constructed world, but it was a crack that was beginning to widen. The unease lingered, a persistent whisper in the back of Eleanor's mind. The next day, driven by a curiosity she couldn't quite name, she decided to look into the recent layoffs at Henderson Automotive more closely. It wasn't standard procedure for her to delve into individual dismissals at subsidiary level, but Liam's face, his quiet dignity, had burrowed under her skin. She instructed her usually unflappable executive assistant, Martha, a woman who had been with her for 15 years and possessed an almost telepathic understanding of her moods, to pull the detailed files on the restructuring. Martha raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, but complied without question. Hours later, Eleanor sat at her expansive mahogany desk, the city skyline a dramatic backdrop, sifting through digital personnel records. Her finger hovered over the search bar. She typed, "Caldwell, Liam." His employee file appeared on the screen. Photograph, a slightly younger Liam, a hesitant smile, eyes full of a hope that seemed dimmer now. Employment history, 10 years, stellar reviews, commendations for problem solving, notes on his willingness to mentor junior mechanics. Then the final entry, termination, reason, redundancy due to strategic realignment. Eleanor stared at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. It was him. The man who had knelt on the pavement, his hands gentle and sure as he fixed her shoe. The man who had spoken of paying it forward. He hadn't just been some random stranger, he had been one of her employees, fired, discarded. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The worn clothes, the sadness in his eyes, his quiet admission of "I was a mechanic," it all coalesced into a sickening picture of injustice. Redundancy. Was that what his skill, his loyalty, his inherent decency amounted to? A line item deemed expendable. A cold anger began to smolder within her, directed not just at the impersonal nature of corporate decisions, but at herself, for her detachment, for her ignorance of the human stories behind the spreadsheets. She remembered his hands, capable and stained with honest work, and then the crisp, dismissive termination letter he must have received. The contrast was jarring, a stark indictment of a system that could so easily overlook true worth. Her own repaired shoe, sitting by her desk where she'd left it as a curious memento, now felt like a burning coal. It was no longer a symbol of a stranger's kindness, but a testament to a profound, systemic failure that she, Eleanor Vance, had unknowingly orchestrated and now, with dawning horror, fully comprehended. Eleanor's initial shock quickly hardened into a steely resolve. This wasn't just about one man. It was about the integrity of her entire company, about the values she purportedly stood for. She delved deeper, her usual meticulousness now fueled by a potent mix of guilt and indignation. She cross-referenced Henderson's reports with performance metrics and service department outputs. The numbers didn't quite add up. Henderson Automotive's recent dip in profitability, which Henderson had attributed to market saturation and used to justify the layoffs, looked suspiciously like mismanagement when scrutinized more closely. Liam Caldwell, far from being redundant, was consistently one of the most productive and highly rated mechanics in his branch. There were customer testimonials praising his skill and honesty. There was no logical reason for his dismissal under a genuine redundancy protocol. The truth, when she finally pieced it together through discreet inquiries facilitated by Martha, was uglier. Mr. Martha Hobie Anner Hobie Sell. Henderson had been covering his own department's inefficiencies, using the restructuring directive as a smokescreen to eliminate more senior, slightly higher-paid employees like Liam, replacing them with cheaper, less experienced hires to superficially boost his short-term budget figures. The following morning, Mr. Henderson was summoned to Eleanor Vance's penthouse office, a summons that brooked no refusal. He arrived, preening slightly, expecting perhaps a commendation for his swift implementation of the cost-cutting measures. He found Eleanor Vance not at her expansive desk, but standing by the window, her back to him, looking out over the city. The repaired shoe sat on the corner of her otherwise clear desk, a silent, potent observer. "Henderson," she said, her voice deceptively calm. "Tell me about Liam Caldwell." Henderson blinked, momentarily thrown. "Caldwell, one of the redundancies, Miss Vance." "A necessary cut. Standard procedure." "Was it standard procedure, Henderson?" Eleanor turned, her eyes like chips of ice, "to falsify performance justifications. To terminate one of your most skilled mechanics to mask your own unit's declining efficiency." Henderson's composure began to crack. A sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. I assure you, Miss Vance, all decisions were made in accordance with company policy." "Company policy does not include deceit, Henderson," Eleanor interrupted, her voice rising slightly, edged with a cold fury. "Liam Caldwell fixed my shoe on a city street yesterday, expecting nothing in return. He showed more integrity in that single, selfless act than you've displayed in your entire recent tenure. He's not just a number, Henderson. He's a human being, a skilled craftsman, a man of quiet dignity, whom you discarded without a second thought to protect your own position." Henderson visibly paled, stammering, but Eleanor cut him off. "Your employment with Vance Automotive Group is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." The confrontation was swift, decisive. For Eleanor, it was more than just firing an incompetent manager. It was a reclaiming of something vital, a stand against the dehumanizing tendencies that could creep into any large organization if left unchecked. Liam's kindness had unknowingly ignited a firestorm of change. The dismissal of Henderson was only the first step. A deeper, more personal obligation gnawed at Eleanor. She had to find Liam Caldwell. Not just to offer him his job back, but to apologize, to acknowledge the wrong that had been done, to somehow bridge the vast gulf between her world and his. Martha, with her customary efficiency and a surprising degree of personal investment, she'd been quietly appalled by Henderson's actions when Eleanor had shared the details, took on the task of locating Liam. It wasn't easy. His employee file had a last known address, but no current phone number that worked. Martha, however, was resourceful. She made discreet inquiries, pulling a few strings, her loyalty to Eleanor now tinged with a genuine desire to see this situation rectified. Within a day, she had an address, a small, walk-up apartment building in a modest, working-class neighborhood, a world away from Eleanor's usual orbit of penthouses and corporate headquarters. The journey there, with Eleanor in the back seat of her car, driven this time by a subdued Martha, who had insisted on accompanying her, was a visual and emotional pilgrimage. They left behind the gleaming steel and glass towers of the financial district, venturing into streets lined with older buildings, local grocery stores, and the vibrant, sometimes gritty, tapestry of everyday life. Children played on stoops, laundry flapped on lines strung between windows, the aroma of diverse cuisines wafted from open doorways. It was a world Liam inhabited, a world her decisions had profoundly impacted. Eleanor felt a knot of nervousness tighten in her stomach. What would she say? How could she adequately convey her regret, her respect? The power dynamic was so skewed. She was the CEO, the one who held, however indirectly, the reins of his fate. But in this moment, she felt strangely humbled, acutely aware that true worth wasn't measured in stock options or corporate titles. As they pulled up to the address, a slightly run-down but clean brick building, Eleanor took a deep breath. This wasn't a business meeting, it was a reckoning, a chance to mend something more profound than a broken shoe. It was about restoring a measure of faith, both his and, perhaps more importantly, her own. She clutched her purse, her knuckles white, the image of Liam kneeling on the pavement, his kind eyes, vivid in her mind. She had to do this right. Eleanor climbed the worn wooden steps of the apartment building, Martha waiting discreetly by the car. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and cooked onions. She found apartment 3B and knocked, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. The door opened a crack, and a woman with tired but kind eyes peered out. Sarah, Liam's wife. Behind her, Eleanor could hear the sound of a child coughing, a dry, persistent hack. "Yes?" Sarah asked, her voice wary. "I'm looking for Liam Caldwell," Eleanor said, her voice softer than usual. "My name is Eleanor Vance." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. The name, though perhaps not instantly recognizable as the CEO, carried an air of authority. She opened the door wider. Liam was sitting at a small kitchen table, a stack of bills spread before him, his face a mask of worry. He looked up, and his eyes met Eleanor's. Recognition dawned slowly, then disbelief. "Ma'am, the lady with the shoe?" He stood up, confused, a flicker of apprehension in his gaze. What could this wealthy woman possibly want with him now? "Yes, Liam, it's me," Eleanor said, stepping into the small, sparsely furnished apartment. It was clean, filled with the small, brave touches of a home struggling to stay afloat, a child's colorful drawing taped to the refrigerator. The sight of it, the undeniable reality of their struggle, tightened the knot of remorse in her chest. I owe you an apology, Liam," she began, her voice trembling slightly despite her effort to remain composed. "A profound one. Not just for my company firing you, which was a terrible mistake and an injustice, but for my own ignorance. For not seeing, not understanding." Liam stared at her, utterly bewildered. "Your company? You mean Henderson Automotive?" Eleanor nodded. "I am Eleanor Vance, the CEO of Vance Automotive Group, the parent company." Liam sank back into his chair, his face paling. The woman whose shoe he'd fixed, the act of simple kindness he'd performed without a second thought, was the head of the corporation that had just upended his life. The irony was staggering, almost cruel. Sarah moved to his side, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. "CEO?" she whispered, looking from Liam to Eleanor. Eleanor's gaze was direct, filled with a sincerity that cut through the corporate persona. "Yes, and I'm here because what happened to you was wrong. Mr. Henderson has been dismissed. But more importantly, I'm here because you, Liam, showed me something vital. You reminded me what integrity and kindness look like, even when facing hardship. You were trying to pay it forward, and instead, my company, we failed you." She took a deep breath. "I want to offer you your job back, Liam, with full back pay, of course. And not just your old job. I want to offer you a new position as a senior technical trainer for our new apprentices. Your skills are exceptional, but your character, your decency, that's invaluable. We need people like you setting the example." Liam was speechless. Tears welled in his eyes, tears of relief, of disbelief, of a hope he hadn't dared to feel for days. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The weight that had been crushing them seemed to lift, ever so slightly. Eleanor watched them, her own eyes unexpectedly moist. "Kindness," she said softly, "shouldn't be a liability. It should be our greatest asset." The small apartment, moments before filled with a heavy silence of despair, now hummed with a fragile, burgeoning hope. Liam, his voice thick with emotion, finally managed to speak. "Miss Vance, I don't know what to say." He looked at Sarah, whose eyes were shining with unshed tears. Then back at the CEO who stood before him, no longer an intimidating figure of corporate power, but a woman offering a lifeline, an unexpected redemption. "Say you'll accept, Liam," Eleanor urged gently, a small, hopeful smile on her face. "Say you'll help us build a better company, one where people like you are valued not just for what they do, but for who they are." Liam nodded, slowly at first, then with more conviction. "Yes," he said, a watery grin spreading across his face. "Yes, I accept, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you." The relief in the room was palpable, as if a storm cloud had finally passed. Sarah rushed to embrace him, and Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her, a profound sense of rightness that no quarterly profit report had ever given her. In the weeks that followed, Liam Caldwell returned to Henderson Automotive, not as a discarded mechanic, but as a respected senior trainer. His quiet competence and inherent decency quickly earned him the admiration of his colleagues and the eager attention of the new apprentices he mentored. He taught them not just the intricacies of engine repair, but the value of diligence, honesty, and taking pride in one's work. He often shared his own story, discreetly omitting Eleanor's specific role in the initial encounter, but emphasizing how a small act of help, given freely, had changed his life, reminding them that their skills were a way to serve others. Eleanor Vance, profoundly changed by her encounter with Liam, initiated a series of reforms within Vance Automotive Group. She established an employee welfare committee, spearheaded a review of termination policies to ensure fairness and transparency, and launched an internal campaign called Small Acts, Big Impact, encouraging a culture of mutual respect and support. The repaired Italian shoe found a permanent place on her desk, a constant, tangible reminder of the day a broke mechanic knelt to help a stranger, and in doing so, unknowingly mended something far more significant within the heart of a CEO and her company. It reminded her that leadership wasn't just about strategies and spreadsheets, but about seeing the humanity in every individual, understanding that the true strength of any organization lay in the character of its people. Sometimes, she would look at it and think of Liam, not as an employee, but as a teacher. He had taught her that the most valuable currency wasn't listed on any stock exchange. It was kindness, integrity, and the courage to connect, human to human, even across the vast divides of circumstance. And in that truth, she found a new, more profound purpose for her own journey. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even in the face of hardship, small acts of kindness can create ripples of profound change, please like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Here, we believe that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate, but in what we give, and in the connections we forge. Sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin in the most unexpected ways, often with a simple gesture that speaks volumes. We'll see you in the next one, where another soul waits to be seen, and another story of hope waits to unfold.